Ling Chai asked me to talk about meditation tonight. Before I start, let me ask you a couple of questions. Why do you meditate? Anyone? Calm and wisdom. Anybody disagrees? Anybody agrees? Calmness and peace. No need wisdom. Wisdom will come. Okay. If you keep on meditating, wisdom will come. You don't think so?
Buddha's two previous teachers meditated until so high, but
You see, the Bodhisattva's two previous teachers meditated until so high, but there was no wisdom.
To acquire the wisdom, then you meditate, you feel calm and wisdom. How to acquire the wisdom through meditation?
Okay, how to acquire the wisdom through meditation. Let's talk about the theory of developing Buddhist wisdom. And let's take one particular sutta to have a look at how this wisdom can come about. And let's take a very famous sutta, the second discourse that the Buddha gave to a group of 5 ascetics, Anatta Lakkhana Sutta. This sutta, if you analyze it, you can see the different levels of knowledge and wisdom that are required in order for one to cultivate wisdom. First, the Buddha said, monks, form is anatta. If form were atta, then it will not lead to affliction, to suffering. And you could tell form, be this way, don't be this way. But because form is not atta, is anatta, therefore it leads to affliction, it leads to suffering. And you cannot tell form, be like that, don't be like that. Now, form is not just a visual object. Here the Buddha is making use of the classification of the 5 khandhas, the 5 aggregates. And the first one is rupa, form. Second is vedana, feelings. Third is sanya, or perception. Fourth is sankhara, or mental formations, or volitional formations. And the fifth one is vijnana, or consciousness. So he repeats this for each of the 5 aggregates. Looking at the scheme of the 5 aggregates, form refers to anything that is non-mental in nature. Matter, any material form. Material form need not necessarily mean only your physical body. It could mean colors, vibrations, smells, tastes. These are also types of form. If you look at this, the Buddha is actually giving the theory to them. First, he introduces the group of 5 bhikkhus, the notion or the concept or the teaching of anatta. So this is the basic theory behind it. He will tell the theory first. He says, monks, rupa or form is anatta, is not self. Why is it not self? Because of this, because of that. Then he will go on to each of the 5 aggregates. Feelings, as well as perceptions, as well as volitional formations and consciousness, they are also not self, because they lead to affliction, to suffering, and you have no control over them. Is it true that you have no control over your body? Are you sure or not? If you have no control, you won't be able to come here tonight. You won't be able to nod your head. So you have some degree of control. What the Buddha is trying to negate is that the Buddha already has an idea of what he means by atta. So from this we can deduce that the Buddha's idea of atta is something which is in total control, absolute control. But because we don't have absolute control, the Buddha says there's no atta. Okay, so one of the characteristics of atta that the Buddha is negating is that it has total absolute control. The Buddha says there's no such thing as total absolute control. You have some degree of control, but it's not total. So that is the first stage. Now after he has gone through this, then he goes on to the next round. He says, monks, is form permanent or impermanent? And then the monk says, impermanent, Bhante. What is impermanent, sukha or dukkha? And the monk said, dukkha. So if it's something that is impermanent and dukkha and subject to change, is it appropriate, is it fitting to regard it as mine or I or myself? Then the monk said, no. It's not proper, not fitting to regard something which is impermanent, suffering and subject to change as mine, I, or myself. Then the Buddha went on to each of these 5 aggregates to consciousness. And he ends up by saying, therefore, bhikkhus, whatever form of the past or the present or the future, whether it's fine or whether it's coarse, whether it's in your presence or in your absence, whether it's near or far, whatever, all forms are to be regarded as not mine, not I, not myself. There's another theory. So the first step in Buddhist knowledge is to have some theory. And after they have accepted the theory through cross-questioning, then the Buddha asked them, therefore, you should make use of this theory and put this theory into practice. Whatever form or feelings or perceptions, mental formations or consciousness, whether past, present, future, whether it's gross or it's subtle, whether it's near or far, and so forth, all of them should be regarded as not mine, not I, not myself. And you should regard it with right knowledge. The first step would be intellectual knowledge, because you have accepted something from the Buddha on the basis of reasoning. What he says is logical, and then you accept it. And then, secondly, you put it into practice. Finally, the right knowledge or the right wisdom would be your intuition. As you put that into practice, as you regard everything, all of the 5 aggregates in terms of not mine, not I, not myself, then the actual insight will arise. Initially, it's not insight. Initially, instead of panya, it is sanya. What is sanya? Sanya is perception. Panya is wisdom. So in order for wisdom to arise, you start off with sanya. Before you have sanya, you also need sati. What is sati? Sati is usually translated as mindfulness. But the actual meaning of sati comes from the root sara. And the verb of sati is sarati, which means to remember. We all have been used to understanding sati as mindfulness, as awareness. What has awareness got to do with remembering? In the Samyutta Nikaya, in the Bojjhanga Samyutta, in the chapter connected with the Bojjhangas, the enlightenment factors, the Buddha talked about sati sambojjhanga, the enlightenment factor of sati. And there he gives a lot of examples of how sati or mindfulness, as we now translate it, can be regarded as a bojjhanga, as a factor of enlightenment. He says when you meet a monk, when you see a monk, when you follow him, and then you listen to what he has to say regarding the practice, listen to his discourse, and after that you go to a secluded place and you sit down and you remember what he tells you, that is when the sati sambojjhanga, the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, comes into being. So the first level of sati that is required is actually remembrance. You remember instructions, what your teacher told you. In the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the bhikkhus who are listening to the Buddha will have to remember his words. So the first level of mindfulness or sati is remembering instructions. The monks had to remember what Buddha told them, that everything is anatta, that everything that is impermanent and suffering, subject to change, should not be regarded as atta, and therefore we should regard all of the 5 aggregates, whatever they were in the past, present, future, and so forth, as not mine, not I, not myself. You remember that, and after that, the next thing you need to do is to remind yourself to put it into practice. And that's about the most difficult thing to do, to remember to put into practice. Before the Buddha passed away, he said, Apamadena sampadeta. Pamada means negligence, forgetfulness. Apamada means non-negligence, non-forgetfulness. Sampadeta, fulfill. Be fulfilled through heedfulness, through non-forgetfulness. So you must always remember the Buddha's instructions, remember to put them into practice. That's one of the most difficult things to do. We all have read so much about the Satipatthana Sutta, and maybe you read Venerable Sujiva's manual on meditation. You may read from cover to cover, but how much do you remember? You know all the different methods and all the different techniques to apply when you meet with certain circumstances, but how often do you remember to put it into practice? So the first step in the development of Buddhist wisdom is to listen to the Dhamma, to understand and accept the theory. And then next thing is to remember the theory and remind yourself to put it into practice. That's why in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Force, Sutta number 246, Sotapatiyanga Sutta, that it talks about 4 factors that will conduce to attainment of Sotapanna. The first one is associating with a good person. The second one is listening to the Dhamma that this good person gives to you. The third one is, as he's giving the Dhamma talk, you should not be distracted. Pay proper attention, remember the teachings, and finally the fourth one is to put the instructions into practice. Only with these 4 factors can one walk on a path to enlightenment. So first is you have the theory, then you must remember the theory, and then remind yourself to put it into practice. Many years ago, when I first went to Mahasi Meditation Center, 1979, I met one monk who was meditating there. He was a scholar, like many Burmese monks. They had studied Pali grammar, Abhidhamma, and some suttas. So he was a Dhammacharya. At that time, I was new to the center, and he talked to me. He said that when he first came into the center, he didn't quite believe the simplicity of the method, because in Mahasi Meditation Center, the method was very simple. All you need to do is to practice bare awareness. Whatever you see, hear, smell, taste, be aware of the occurrence and to label them. When you see, you just note in your mind, seeing. When you hear, hearing. When you think, thinking. When you plan, planning. Then when you watch rising and falling, you just keep label it rising, falling. When you're walking, you label it lifting, pushing, putting down, and so forth. So he said he didn't quite believe these instructions because he was a scholar. And in the Pali, it's always stated that one must contemplate and consider and reflect, which is a thinking process, not just bare awareness. Although he didn't quite believe at the beginning, later on he put aside his views and just followed instructions. And eventually he went very deep in his practice, and he could see things arising and passing away, and went through different levels of understanding and insight. Nowadays in the West, it has become very popular to talk about just bare awareness, not to have any preconceived ideas about things, and to just be aware, to be in the present moment. One of the more famous Westerners now in this present time is Eckhart Tolle. How many of you have heard of Eckhart Tolle? Yeah, Power of Now, being in the present moment. That book has touched the lives of many people and have changed their lives, given them a better quality in their life. I was very curious about this Eckhart Tolle because he was not a Buddhist. I read a bit about his background, and I found that he came from a Christian background. He went through a period of very severe depression until he was at the verge of committing suicide. I think he was in his bedroom at the time, lying on his bed. A thought arose in him: I cannot live with myself any longer. At that moment, he looked back at his thought, and then he said, hey, who is this? There are 2 people. I cannot live with myself any longer. So there's one I and one self, right? Who are these 2 people? He stepped back and he looked at it and he saw that it was just a thought. There's no one there. It's just a thought that says, I cannot live with myself any longer. And at that very moment, he realized anatta. He saw that there was no self there. There was just this thought. And you identified with the thought, thinking that it's you, yours, yourself. That's what most of us do. We think that we are our thoughts. Our thoughts belong to us. Our emotions belong to us. When we like them, we feel very proud. When we don't like them, we feel very bad. How can I have such bad thoughts? How can I have such dirty thoughts? How can I have anger towards my parents? Or how can I be such an ungrateful mother or son? Because we identify with our thoughts, we create suffering for ourselves. But at that point, Eckhart Tolle realized non-self. And after that, something happened to him. Next morning, he woke up and everything was different. From a depressed person who was at the verge of committing suicide, now the whole world looked so beautiful. And it was so joyful to him to be freed from this burden of the self. And it seems that he went sitting around the parks, doing nothing, enjoying the bliss of his awakening for a couple of years. Until people noticed this weird guy and then talked to him and found out that he was quite a wise person. Now, the way he got his awakening is very unconventional and very spontaneous. He never studied Buddhism. He never heard about the Four Noble Truths. He never studied this concept of anicca, dukkha, or anatta. But he realized it. When he became famous, he began to tell people about the beauty of being in the present moment. Because he did not really study any particular spiritual path to get awakened, he didn't really have any method. It was just his spontaneous personal experience, maybe due to cultivation in past lives. And because of that, he's always talking about his own personal experience. And his personal experience is that since his awakening, he has been in the present moment most of the time. And he doesn't identify with his thoughts. And he keeps on telling people that. But in the course of his teaching, his techniques began to grow because he started to find out how to teach people, because not everybody is like him. Later on, as I listened to some of his talks, I feel that he is borrowing from a lot of Buddhist practices. He's doing anapana, watching your breath, and he's talking about being with the senses, come back to your body awareness. Now, back in SBS, we have someone who's staying with us who is a fan of Eckhart Tolle. He could sit for hours listening to Eckhart Tolle DVD. But when we give talks, you will just run away or fall asleep, not be interested. So his practice is trying to be in the present moment, always coming back to the present moment. Now, I want to look at these three cases. One is the case of this monk in Masi Meditation Center in 1979, born in Burma, so he's Buddhist by birth. And also he's a scholar. So he knows all these things already in his mind. He knows everything. Not only anicca, dukkha, anatta, but all the conditional relations of the Abhidhamma. He knows all these paticca samuppada. Everything he knows. So for him, it's not really necessary. It's already in the background. All he needs to do is to practice bare awareness, and everything else will fit in. Eckhart Tolle is an exception. Because of some maybe past life cultivation, he was awakened without having any particular method. Many times in the suttas, the Buddha says, monks, develop the perception of not self. Develop the perception of impermanence. Develop the perception of disenchantment, dispassion, and so forth. Now, let's look at the word perception. Perception is a translation of the word sanya. And if you look at the scheme of the five aggregates, you'll see that we have rupa, vedana, sanya, sankhara, and vijnana. Sankhara is defined as volitional formations. Now, volitional formations here means that it is connected with volition. It's something that you intend. There is intention behind what you do. Whereas feelings and perceptions and consciousness are not under sankhara. Why? Because you got no choice. It's not because you want to feel that you feel. You feel because you have to feel. Right? And you perceive because of your past conditioning. Your perception, whatever perception you have, is a result of past conditioning. How you were educated, what is your belief system, what are your views, what are your opinions, what is your culture, the mass media, and everything. A lot of conditions interact to bring up a perception. Now, let's look at perception and memory. We have two types of memory. One is spontaneous memory. You look at someone, immediately you recognize it. You look at this, you immediately recognize what is this. You don't have to think about it. But then, when you came here, you misplaced your keys. And then you have to think, oh, where did I put my keys? Right? Not? And you have to deliberately try to find out when was the last time you handled the keys. Right? Not? So this is something volitional. When you look at something and you remember it without any volition, that comes under perception. You look at this and you recognize that it is a lid and it's made of plastic and it's pink color. Now we have sati and sanya. Sanya covers the passive aspect of memory, and sati covers the active aspect of memory. Because sati is not vedana, is not sanya, is not consciousness. It comes under sankhara, under volitional formations. Sati is something which is intentional. You have to bring it up. Whereas sanya is something unintentional. When you look at somebody, immediately the perception arises because of your past conditioning. You feel something because consciousness is there and it feels whether it's pleasant or unpleasant in your body. Feeling is uncontrollable. Now, you might say that when you feel something and then you react to it mentally, then your feeling is created by yourself. But actually, it is not so. This feeling comes together with the other mental factors that cause this mental reaction. Consciousness also is not something volitional. Consciousness is there because the causes and conditions are there. When, for example, eye consciousness arises because the conditions are there. There's light, there's an object, it attracts your attention, you pay attention, pop, eye consciousness arises. For example, now, you're listening to me and looking at me, but you may not be aware of a certain part of the body. Until now that I tell you, you're suddenly aware of it. You was there, but you were not aware of it. Okay, so coming back to this question of bare awareness, how we perceive something depends on our past conditioning. And this monk who was in Mahasi Meditation Center had been a scholar before. He knew all the Buddhist theories by heart and at the tip of his fingers. And for him, it's not necessary to think anymore. Whenever he perceives anything, he will automatically look at it in terms of what he has studied. But if you had no Buddhist knowledge at all, and you had, on the other hand, a non-Buddhist soul theory, for example, you say that there's actually someone there who coming is back to this person in SPS. He was practicing this Eckhart Tolle, being in the present. He looked very mindful. He would always try to be in the present moment. But he does not want to watch his thoughts. Whenever he had any thoughts, whenever he has any thinking or any problems that would disturb him, he would just push them away and focus his attention in the present moment. That means come back to the senses, breathing or whatever he's doing at the moment. So although he seemed to be mindful, everybody knows that he gets worked up very easily. When we talk to him and we have a discussion, he can get very agitated and very emotional about certain things that he feels. And he doesn't see that. He doesn't see that he reacts so strongly when he's supposed to be in the present moment. There are also many yogis who have been trained to just practice bare awareness. Just no thinking, and let them go. No planning, and cut. Don't get involved in the thinking and so forth. After many years of practice, they still don't understand their thoughts. They still don't understand their neuroses, their emotional or relationship issues. Certain habitual reactions that arise in them, and as good vipassana meditators, they just note and cut. So you don't really see what is the cause behind all these things. And they also have this idea that the most important thing is that you must always come back to your breath or to your rising and falling. Whatever happens, that is a safety measure. And so when they do that, of course, they feel very nice and peaceful and calm. Whether you know it or you don't, the mind gets attached to peace and calmness. If you get lights, also you get attached to lights. Whatever it is that is nice and peaceful and calm and pleasurable, the mind gets attached to it, even without your knowing it, very subtly. Some time ago, one of our devotees said that he had been practicing quite regularly at home, watching his breath and keeping in the present moment. He had been doing it for a long time. And then one day he had these lights, everything became very bright and very peaceful. Then suddenly he felt that the center of his chest was very tight and congested, and then the thing disappeared. So he came to ask me, why is it like that? Previously it wasn't like that, now only it happens. I told him, you go back and watch your mind. Is it because you are attached to that state and you want to maintain it? That's why you are stressed. And I said, okay, I'll go back and look. So the next day he came to see me and said, hey, yeah, Bhante, you're right. He wasn't watching his mind. He was just so involved in the nice sensation and wanting to maintain it. He's not wanting to let go. The mind is trying to maintain that state and not wanting it to go away. That's why he was stressed. So when he was able to see it, then it didn't matter to him anymore. Whether the state stays or not, it does not matter. It's because you want it to stay and you're afraid that it might go away. That's why this tension and stress arises in you. Sometimes people say, why is it now I sit already, so many thoughts and get very fed up when I get up. Recently I saw another yogi came and told me, he said, last time I could sit for 1 hour, no problem. Now I sit for half an hour only. I don't know why, I just get up. I said, you watch your mind and see why. And there must be a reason for it. So later he came to me, he said, yeah, now I know. I watch my mind. It's because I've been hearing all these interviews, all these people talking about seeing lights and seeing this. I don't see anything, that's why I get so fed up and I get up. No, it's because of expectations. So it's so important to watch your mind, not just to focus on your rising and falling, or on your breath, or the object. You just focus on the object and you get peace and calmness. You get stuck there, one. And you don't know, sometimes certain things happen, and why suddenly it goes away, why I feel tight, why I feel stressed, why I get up. It's because you don't watch your mental reaction. So whatever you are doing, no matter how good your concentration is, always check your mind. How is your mind? What is your mind like? How is it now reacting or responding to what you are doing? Okay, so come back to this person who was doing this Eckhart Tolle thing. So I told him, several times I told him, I'm not saying that Eckhart Tolle is wrong. What Eckhart Tolle is telling you is his practice after his awakening. He's not telling you about how he got awakened, because he got awakened accidentally. After he got awakened, he's automatically in that mode. But if you have not reached that stage, you cannot go to that mode. If you go to that mode, it's an artificial construct. It's not something that comes out of wisdom. You are just programming the mind to behave in a certain way. But when conditions are not right, to the subject of cultivating wisdom, first you need to have the theory. You have to remember the theory, remind yourself to put it into practice. And I keep on telling people, it's not enough just to see things arise and pass away. You have to investigate further. It's not enough just to be aware of objects, or even just be aware of your mind. Because if you look at the Bojjhangas, the factors of enlightenment, there are 7 factors of enlightenment, right? The first one is sati, mindfulness. What is the second one? Dhamma vichaya, investigation of the Dhamma. How do you investigate the Dhamma? That's important. This is a little bit tricky, because Dhamma investigation can also be mistaken to mean just intellectual analysis. But it's a fine line to differentiate real investigation of Dhamma and intellectual analysis. Let's look at it practically. Now, in the Satipatthana Sutta, the 4th Satipatthana is Dhammanupassana, contemplation of mental objects. The word anupassana, although it has been translated as contemplation, actually literally means anu and pasana. Pasana is to observe or to see. Anu can mean 2 things. It can mean following behind, or it can mean according to. So, dhammesu dhammanupasana, in regard to dhammas, to mental objects, you observe them following behind them, or you observe them according to what they are. What is meant by following behind? It's very strange, because in this Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha talks about the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And yet when he describes these 4 establishments of mindfulness, he doesn't use the word sati. What does he use? He uses the word anupassana. Kaya anupassana. He uses the word vedanasu vedananupassana. Chitte chittanupassana. Dhammesu dhammanupassana. Now, as I said earlier, the word sati actually means remember. But nowadays, we use the word mindfulness to mean awareness. What's the difference between remembering and awareness? If you look at how our mind works and how mindfulness works, it is always looking back at what has happened immediately. This is very obvious when you are having thoughts. The moment you realize that you're having thoughts and you're mindful of it, is a past object. It cannot be in the present. The moment you hear something and you're aware of it, it comes after the hearing. You hear something first, a sound, and then your mind reacts to it. You recognize the sound, and you think about the sound, and then you remember, and then you watch the thoughts connected with the hearing. So actually, it is remembering. It is remembering an immediate past object. So, Dhammanupassana means reflecting back at the mental object. Now, in this Dhammanupassana, the Buddha says, here the bhikkhu knows form and he knows the I. He knows, on account of these 2, the fetter that arises, which means that there is form and there is I, and because the I perceives the form, then a fetter arises. What is a fetter? Attachment or dislike or comment, something that arises in your mind. So he knows the fetter. He knows that mental state that arises on account of the seeing process. He understands how this arises. He understands how, when this fetter has arisen, one can overcome it, abandon it. And he also understands how, once it has been abandoned, how it won't arise again in the future. So there's a lot of hows involved. When you see there's a lot of hows involved, it means that you have to see cause and effect. You have to see the relation between one object and the other. Now we come to the mind. Manancha bhajanati, dhammeja bhajanati. He knows the mind, he knows mental objects. And he knows the factor that arises on account of these two. So when there is a mind and there's a mental object, the mind is thinking of something, then there is a mental state that arises, a factor. Lobha, dosa, moha, or could be pride, could be jealousy, could be envy, could be stinginess, whatever. But you have to see the relation, how these thoughts arise in relation to the mind coming in contact with the mental object. Now, in that Dhammanupassana, the Buddha also talked about know the mind, know the mental object. Know the mental object means what? What are the mental objects of the mind? It could be anything. It could be any of the 5 sense objects. It could be thoughts, concepts, fears, imaginings, assumptions, theories, speculations, conjectures, opinions. All these are objects of the mind. So when the Buddha says you should know the object of the mind, you should know how these are conditioned into existence as well. Not just whenever there's thinking, just not thinking and push it away. When it's planning and push it away. Angry and push it away. You have to understand the nature of these thoughts, the angry thoughts. Why is there an angry thought in the first place? Why is there frustration? Of course, I must admit that if your mind is not settled or calm enough, you cannot really investigate to see the true nature of your thought. You still need a certain degree of calmness. That's why the Buddha always talked about samatha vipassana. You need to do some sort of practice in order to calm your mind, to tranquilize it, to make it peaceful. Then so when your mind is calm, encourage lay people to develop samatha and vipassana according to your own capability. When I say developing samatha, it need not necessarily mean only by sitting with your eyes closed, cross-legged, and watching your breath or your rising and falling. One can calm the mind by being in the present moment, like what Eckhart Tolle is doing. But there's not wisdom, But that can help to calm your mind because you don't get involved in your thoughts. Whenever you have any thoughts, you feel that those thoughts are not necessary, not important, you don't want to get involved in them, you have to substitute another object for the mind. Because the nature of the mind is that it must always have an object. If you don't have an object, it will think of something. So if you don't want it to think of something useless or trivial, then bring it to the present moment, to the 5 senses, particularly your body sense. So it's like an anchor, a reference point. By doing that, then you can remain calm and peaceful throughout the day. And this is a dynamic sort of stability. It's not the very static sort of stability you get by watching your breath with your eyes closed and with your whole body still. That can bring you into a very deep state of concentration, but it can also lead to attachment. And without your knowing it, it could actually aggravate your other personal problems. Why? Because you have learned to focus your mind and concentrate and look deeply at a particular object. And sometimes when you get angry, you will also concentrate your anger. Because you are more intense. You have learned to intensify the mind, and the mind can become more intensified. It's just a change of object. A couple of years ago, there was one young man who came to SBS. He had been doing samatha, and not bad, his concentration. He was watching his breath and he was seeing light already. So he went to a meditation center and he was doing this practice. And he said that when he was seated in meditation and this light, he was fine. He felt very nice and comfortable. But the moment he got up and started walking around or doing his tasks, then his emotional problems will come again. And then he will feel very uncomfortable and unpleasant, and he cannot solve or resolve his problem. So eventually he thought that perhaps he should do more than just samatha practice. Maybe he should study the Dhamma. So the place where he went for meditation is a meditation center. They don't allow you to read, so they recommended him to come up to SBS. So he came up to SBS, and he said that he's contemplating monkhood. He wants to not only do samatha meditation, he wants to do some reading as well. So he stayed for a week or so doing his thing. And then after that I asked him, how is your practice? And then he said, I still cannot solve my problem. then told him reading is quite useful because it sort of gives you the theoretical background that I talked about earlier. But you have to put it into practice. You have to apply it in your daily life to be able to have an impact on your mindset and your views. So I taught him how to watch his mind throughout the day. Not just watch your breath when you're sitting and then reading. You have to put that into practice throughout your daily life in your daily activities. Every time watch your mind and ask yourself, if the mind is not with the five senses, what is it doing? It's probably thinking, right? Thinking of this and that. And since you are in a monastery and your thoughts are not really important to be indulged in, then you can come back to the present moment. So then his problems will surface as he walks. Things that are unresolved in your heart will surface when you have nothing to do. Like the English say, an idle mind is a devil's workshop. When your mind is idle, then all your past issues which you have not resolved and are still embedded in your subconscious will just surface. That's what happens. People will come for meditation. All their past issues will come in their meditation. After another week, he didn't want to become a monk anymore. And I said, why? He said, 80% of my problems solved already. So he went off. So what I'm trying to say is that although static samatha practice is good because it helps to stabilize and calm your mind, you need to complement that. If you look at the scheme of the Buddha's gradual training, it's very rounded because sitting in meditation, developing the jhanas, going to very deep states of concentration is right at the end. But in between that, there are 7 other steps which require you to practice throughout your whole daily life. Not only when you are seated in meditation. You start off with observing your sila. Then you have to guard the doors of your senses. That's the most difficult thing to do. When you see something, or you hear something, you smell something, taste something, feel something, or even when your mind thinks of something, you are supposed to be able to guard the mind in such a way that it does not react in a negative way. So you see something immediately, if you feel that your mind is reacting negatively, you should catch it and stop it from proliferating. Same for your thoughts as well. The moment a thought arises, instead of reacting to the thoughts, you should do something to stop that reaction. Then after that, when you have managed to guard the doors of your senses, then you practice moderation in eating. When you eat, all your 6 senses are being stimulated. Right or not? You see, you smell, you taste, you feel with your body, you feel nice, and your thoughts also. So if you don't do the first step before that, the step before that is to guard the doors of your senses, how can you be moderate in eating? You cannot practice moderation in eating. You see something, you like it, you just sapu. Cannot stop. Unless you can stop and watch your greed and be able to be aware of the fullness that is enough already, mustn't let the greed take over. Only when you watch your mind can you practice moderation in eating. Then the next step is practice wakefulness. How can you be wakeful? When you don't eat too much. If you eat too much, then you cannot be wakeful and you'll be sleepy. Too much carbohydrates and all the blood is in the digestive system, none go up. Not enough blood to go up to your brain. Then, after you have practiced wakefulness, the next thing the Buddha says is practice mindfulness and full awareness. Mindfulness, like I said, means remembering teachings, reminding yourself to put the instructions into practice, and actually reflect back at the immediate past perception of any of the 6 senses. Awareness means being actually aware of what you are doing, what you intend to do. Be aware of your intentions involved in whatever you want to do. And that's very important. Under that sampajanya, there are 4 aspects which I think is very practical even for lay people. The first one is full awareness of benefit. If you're going to do something, you're going to say something, going to speak something, is it beneficial or not? That's what you have to consider. The second you have to consider is whether it is suitable or timely or not. The third is whether it is relevant or within the scope of what you're supposed to do. And fourthly, whether it is according to fact or is it just an opinion. You must be able to separate fact from opinion. For example, if you pass a judgment on another person, see, he is always late. Whenever we have a meeting, he always comes late. Now that is a judgment and that's an opinion. If you want to state a fact, you could say, we had 5 meetings and out of the 5 meetings, he came late 4 times. See, that's a fact. So you must be able to distinguish between fact and opinion. And if it is an opinion, that is what will make you suffer. Because you're passing judgment on somebody. So this last one is actually non-delusion, not deluded by what is happening at the moment. You will not be deluded only if you can see things as they really are. Now, seeing things as they really are has become a sort of a cliche in a spiritual circle. In the ultimate sense, you could say, see things as they really are, as they arise and pass away. From moment to moment, you see them as impermanent, as suffering, unsatisfactory, and not self. But you can also see conventional things, conceptual things, according as they are. For example, all of us have different personalities. Some of us are extroverts, some of us are by nature introverts. Some of us are by nature very dominant, like to boss people around. Some of us are by nature very passive and very meek and obedient. And some of us have a lot of initiative. Some of us don't have initiative. People must tell you what to do exactly step by step. If you miss out one step, you're finished. See, you never tell me what. One must be aware of all these things. When we are angry at a person, when we are disappointed because the person does not live up to our expectations, then we must understand our disappointment. The Buddha says you should understand your mental object. Your mental object is disappointment. Where does that disappointment come from? Why are you disappointed? Of course, when your mind is very agitated with a lot of emotions, you will not be able to see clearly. So it's good to be able to do some samatha first, whether it's a static samatha or dynamic samatha. Static one means just sitting down and watching your breath. Dynamic one means being in the present moment, being aware of your five senses and not let your mind indulge in all those thoughts. You find that you try to analyze your disappointment and you cannot do so because of too much emotional upheaval. Don't look at it. Let it be first. Come back to the present moment. Be aware of the physical reactions or manifestations of your frustration. And what are they? When you feel frustrated or disappointment, you feel a congestion in your heart, in your chest, you feel miserable throughout the whole body, you feel a lot of heat and blood gushing up to your face, increase of heart rate. So be aware of all these physical sensations. Distract your mind's attention from the subject matter that is making you miserable. Stop thinking about what is making you frustrated or disappointed, but be aware of these physical sensations. When you do that, you are not feeding your thoughts with more fuel to make it even worse, right? So you're distracting your attention. After some time, it will calm down. Then you do something else. You could just bring your attention back to whatever you're doing, be in the present moment. And after some time, the thought will arise again and again because you have not settled it. Let it come. When you're not ready, don't analyze. Let it be. When you're ready, you'll be able to see that your disappointment or your frustration is due to certain unrealistic expectations. You do not see according to reality that this person is of such a character. You cannot change him. If he's a bossy person, you cannot change him to be a meek or gentle person. He's born like that. You have to accept this person for what he or she is. If you want to work with him or her, you have to accept. If you don't accept, don't work. If you have to work, then you have to accept, or else you're making yourself miserable for nothing. So that's how you apply Dhamma Vicaya, how you investigate the Dhamma. The Dhamma means not only the five aggregates, it means also all these concepts that are appearing in your mind. Because all your thoughts are also constructs of the mind. They are also sankharas. In a sense, they are conditioned into existence. You will see that a lot of our sufferings are always due to expectations. Frustrated expectations. You expect someone to behave in a certain way and he or she doesn't. So you feel frustrated and disappointed. But is it realistic to expect that person to behave in that way and not in the first place? Because they are like that. That's why this is the fourth aspect of clear awareness or full awareness, seeing things as they really are. Then you have to accept yourself also, not to be too harsh on yourself, particularly perfectionists. They want to be perfect. But no one is perfect. You can watch yourself. And I know that because I'm also a perfectionist. So sometimes I can see this perfectionist streak coming up. I will look at the circumstances. If I can afford to entertain it, then I will entertain it. If I cannot because of time constraint or whatever, then can't be let go. That is how wisdom arises. Now, wisdom arises because you are able to understand things as they really are, whether they are conventional in nature or ultimate in nature. Another thing that you need to understand is that in order for wisdom to arise and have an impact on your life, it must be a continual process, not something that you develop only in a retreat. Because a retreat is a very artificial environment. It's a simulated environment where you are spoon-fed. All you need to do is to eat, sleep, meditate, eat, sleep, meditate. You don't have to do anything. When you come back into the world, there are so many things you have to do. And because you are so attached to the idea of retreat that you must have such conditions in order to meditate, then you have a very good excuse not to meditate when you get back to the world. Conditions not right, how to meditate? Cannot walk slowly, cannot see with my eyes closed, there's no need to meditate. It's a very lame excuse. Mindfulness can be practiced throughout the whole day, anytime, whenever you remember to. It's a matter of remembering. That's why Buddha says, apamadena sampadeta. Be fulfilled through heedfulness, through non-negligence. You know what is negligence? Negligence is not doing what you're supposed to do, or doing what you're not supposed to do. So the practice of mindfulness can be done throughout the whole day. Coming back to this gradual training, we are on step number 5. Step number 5 is, remember, first step is sila, second is guarding your doors of the senses, third step is moderation in eating, fourth step is to practice wakefulness, and the fifth step is to practice mindfulness and full awareness. Full awareness has got 4 aspects. One is consider whether something is beneficial or not, whether something is suitable or not, whether it is within your scope or not, and thirdly, whether it's according to reality or not. So these are not only confined to a meditative situation, this is very, very relevant even to daily life, even to office. And with these 4 things, you can become a top CEO, Only after that, then the Buddha says, okay, go and look for a secluded place, go to the forest and sit down. You don't go straight to the forest, you have to do all these things first. These are all the preliminaries. Then you say you go to the forest, look for a secluded place, and then sit down with your back straight, with your mindfulness established. After that, the next step is to overcome the 5 hindrances. What are the 5 hindrances? Sensual desire, anger, sloth and torpor, restlessness, remorse, doubt. You have to overcome these first, and then only after that you develop the jhanas. But you don't sit in meditation and get absorbed in the jhanas the whole day. These instructions are for monks. Monks during the Buddha's time are not as pampered as we are nowadays. You have to do a lot of things yourself. You have to go for pindapat every day, come back, and then robes have to be dyed almost once a week because they use natural dye. Natural dye does not stay very long. Every time you wash it, it comes out. You have to boil the natural dye again and then dye it again. So it's a lot of work. Then you have to patch your robes. A lot of things you have to do yourself. So when you get out from your meditation, you are involved in community work. You have to maintain the monastery, do all these duties towards your teacher and so forth. Go for pindapat, do your dyeing, so all those things. And while you're doing all these things, you have to go back to step number 1, observe your sila, guard the doors of your senses, especially when you are with lay people in town, be moderate in eating, practice wakefulness, practice mindfulness and full awareness. When you have finished your job, then you go to a secluded place and repeat the process. So it's a cyclical process, not just sitting with your eyes closed. Even when you're not seated, you are supposed to practice also. So you can apply this to your daily life as well. You may not have as much time as monks to practice sitting meditation, formal meditation, but throughout the whole day, you can actually practice mindfulness and full awareness. Guard the doors of your senses. When you see something, you have a mental reaction, watch it. See what is it, what are the causes and conditions behind it. Look at it in terms of anicca, dukkha, anatta. Remember the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the Buddha says, it is not your thought. The thought is not you, it is not yourself. It is just a phenomena that arises because of causes and conditions. Initially, when you practice to watch the immediate past perception at any of the 6 senses, you may only be able to see them arise and pass away. That's the initial step. But don't be content with just seeing them arise and pass away. You must also try to find out their immediate cause. What is the trigger for that thought? What is the trigger for that reaction? Is it because you heard something? Is it because you saw something? Because you tasted something? Or you felt something? Or because a thought arose in you and that thought triggered off another whole stream of thoughts? When you see that, you could step back and reflect on it. The Buddha says, develop the perception of not self. Perception, as I said, is a conditioned phenomena. It is something that arises because of past conditioning. So your past conditioning is the Buddha's teaching. The Buddha says that everything is anatta, it's not self. So your perception is when you see something arise, you can identify or locate the specific immediate cause of a particular mental reaction. then you can see that it is not self. Because it is not you who purposely caused that thought to arise. That thought arose because of that trigger. Then you could use that to look at it in terms of anatta, no self. It's not me. It's a conditioned phenomena that arose because of that particular condition. As you do that often, again and again, then you begin to see that there's not just one cause. There's not just one trigger. That trigger may be the initial one that triggered it off, but there are many other layers behind it. It could be because of what somebody said. But that's not the only reason. It's probably due to some issues that you had with this person in the past, and something which is still inside which you have not resolved. You have not forgiven him. You have passed a judgment on him and say he's always like that. And you have not accepted him for what he is. But he is always like that. So what? Are you willing to accept him for what he is? Or are you still feeling that he should not be like that? If you are resisting what is, then you are not looking at things according to reality. If you want to change that person, you have also got to use your wisdom. Are you in a position to change him or not? If you want to say something to that person, as I said, you must exercise these 4 aspects of full awareness. Is it suitable time for me to say? Is he in a good mood? Is he receptive? What I'm going to say, is it going to be beneficial? Will he listen to what I say and change for the better? If you feel that he is not, don't say. You don't have to say everything that you feel. You only say things at the right time if they are beneficial. It means that you have to exercise some degree of reflection as well. In meditation centers, they tell you don't think too much. Just be aware. Watch, let go. Watch, let go. But when you come into the world, you cannot afford to do that. You have to do a lot of thinking. Like the monk told me, actually in the suttas, the Buddha also gave a lot of instructions to monks to reflect, to consider. For example, the loka dhammas, the 8 worldly conditions, praise and blame, happiness and suffering, gain and loss and so forth. He says the difference between a noble disciple, a knowledgeable noble disciple, and a puthujjana, a worldling, is that a noble disciple, when he encounters these things, he always considers and reflects. These things are impermanent. They won't last. Even if it's sukha, how much comfort that you have, how much happiness you have, he will reflect. It's nice to have now, but it's not going to last forever. It's going off soon. Inherently, it is unsatisfactory, because if you cling to it and it goes away, you're going to suffer for it. And the worldling, who is not knowledgeable, not instructed, does not consider. Whenever he gets anything positive, gets happiness, gets wealth, gets gains, then he will cling to it and wants more. And when he faces hardship, then he will lament, "Ayya, why must it be me? Why like that?" But the instructed noble disciple is able to reflect. Whether it's good or bad, he will reflect. Oh, this is impermanent. Even if it's good, it won't last forever. Even if it is suffering, also it won't last forever. It will go away. Because of that, he is able to maintain even-mindedness in his life. So a certain degree of reflection is also needed. And for the 4 aspects of clear comprehension or full awareness to operate, you need reflection. How can you decide whether something is beneficial or not if you do not have a criteria? How would you decide whether something is suitable or not if you don't have any principles? You must have something to think about. So, bhavana, which is sometimes translated. Comments? Yes. Can you please repeat the question? Whole day. How to recall? Oh, okay, I understand. If you forget your mindfulness or you lose your mindfulness, how to bring it back? How to remember to bring it back? The Buddha talked about the causes and conditions behind wholesome states. And he says the proximate cause for mindfulness to arise is mindfulness. Yes. That's why in the end is being able to remember. So there are various ways that we can help you. For example, we print t-shirts. At the back it says, "Lost in thought, come back to your senses now." Alright? So when you look up and say, "Oh yeah," then come back to your senses. So you can do that by maybe putting a tag here and there in your house. Come back to your senses, come back to your senses, remember, or something like that. You can put tags to remind yourself. Sleeping?
Sleeping time.
Sleeping time, I think it's time to take a rest. But you can be mindful before you sleep. But while you're sleeping, let it be until you get up. But if you're really mindful, even in your dreams, you can know what's happening.
When we are tired, sometimes when we lost at the dream or what, something like that, this one is not totally 100% mindful or what, something like that. How will we solve this problem?
You mean when you are in a dream and you're lost and you cannot be mindful? That is beyond your province already. If you are not able to bring back mindfulness in your daily life, how can you bring back mindfulness in your dream? So in your dream, you have to let go, cannot be helped. But if your mindfulness is strong enough, then you can be mindful in your dream. So don't force it. Let it be in the dream. Try to concentrate more on your daily life. When you're awake, you can be more mindful, more continuously mindful when you're wakeful. Then when you're asleep, you will continue.
There are times when you realize you shouldn't have said it, but I shouldn't have said it. But you realize it when the thing has passed.
But it's not too late. At least you can remember.
But it's not finished, it's up already. You shouldn't have said it.
You're one step behind.
So how to bring it one step forward before you learn?
You learn through experience. You learn through experience. What is past already. You cannot redo it. And you just make sure that next time you're more mindful. And most of the time, we learn the hard way. We have to suffer first, then we remember.
Sometimes after saying, I said, why am I getting angry? I realized, hey, there was angry words. Hey, I'm getting angry. But then it's very angry over already. I should have zip up. But then it's over. But you realize it's like angry earlier.
So you didn't watch that mind that says,
Mind didn't watch it.
you should watch the mind that is regretting.
Oh,
Because that is also an unwholesome state of mind. It is good to regret because it is an indication that you acknowledge you have done something wrong. But you should not blame yourself for that.
then the new mind should watch the mind that is regretting.
Say that it's not mine, that's not me. It's just a mental state that regrets.
You don't intend to say it, but it's just been spoken in that manner. Then you realize, hey, why am I getting angry? I didn't need to say it. You just say that. Then you just watch that mind.
Yeah. Watch that mind. Watch how you're reacting to your mistake. There's one mind that realizes the mistake, and there's another mind that is reacting to the mistake that you made. So the mind is actually changing all the time. You're supposed to step back and to see this changing of the mind.
By doing that, will it bring the mindfulness to come first before you say or do?
Yeah, it will. You will eventually next time before you...
So in the end, it must be.
Yeah, yes. Because in the end, it is the mind that is the forerunner of all things. Before you say anything, you think first. It's just that you're not mindful, you speak first and then you think later. But actually you thought before you spoke, but you did not realize it. So you have to sharpen your mindfulness and come closer, get closer to it.
Aren't we also supposed to purify our thoughts and actions and speech? Itakkanta Sutta and Asana Sutta. Isn't that the next stage? Because very well to watch the mind, to be more mindful, and then to see the conditions of arising of anger, lapses and mindfulness. But when the thought is there, aren't we supposed to do the vitakka, the 5 ways? Or is that only for sitting? Or am I supposed? It's very hard to do if you're doing something to do.
Yeah, you're talking about not just watching the mind, but to be able to distinguish between wholesome and unwholesome thoughts and to curtail them or to avoid them, to purify yourself, purify your mind. Well, you can purify your mind by stopping your mind from continuing those thoughts and coming back to the present moment. And at the same time, you can also watch that those unwholesome states of mind arose because of causes and conditions and they don't belong to you. So actually you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. One thing, you're able to see them arise because of certain causes and conditions. You can perceive them as not I, not mine, not myself. And by perceiving in that way, then you don't get involved in those thoughts. So you're actually purifying your mind.
Can I ask Bhante, what is the, because Bhante mentioned Satipatthana, and in the refrain, internally, externally, both internally, externally, Bhante addressed rising, it's arising
There are different interpretations with regard to the internal and external of the Satipatthana refrain. One of them is, if you are watching the object, that is external. If you are watching the mind, that is internal. Watching the subject, that is internal. If watching the object, it is external. That is one interpretation. Another interpretation is, you observe it in terms of inference. For example, you understand how your mind works, and then when you observe somebody and you see that person agitated, angry, saying things, you can also understand it in that way. That is also not him, no self involved, and it's also due to causes and conditions. Actually, by doing this introspection of oneself, seeing how all our sufferings come about because of our mental constructs, because of our mental perceptions, then we can actually have a sense of oneness with other beings, because we realize that everybody is like that. You're not the only one, and it is because of your own ignorance that we fall prey to all these negative thinking. And then you can sympathize with other people, because you know that, oh, they are not meditators. They wouldn't know all these things. I'm a meditator and I know, and yet, yeah, I'm still caught in it. So that can evoke compassion within us and understanding.
But then
Yes.
sometimes, for example, when we are driving, when somebody, let's say, cut in front of you, automatically that feeling arises without you even knowing. Maybe nobody, it just comes to you. Is this something that is built inside our mind?
He's saying that when you are driving and then somebody overtakes you, cut in front of you, and then anger suddenly arises in you. Without even thinking, anger automatically arises. Is it the defilement that is already in your mind or consciousness? Okay, so you already seen anatta, right? It arose without your intending it to arise. It arose by itself. So, although you see that, because you don't have the perception of anatta, that's why you don't have right view. You think that it's yours, or you think that it's already embedded in your consciousness. But if you had right view, you will perceive it as not self. It's not me. It arose because of causes and conditions. And one of the conditions or causes is because of ignorance. Not knowing that it's not worth getting angry.
It is very automatic.
It's automatic. Actually, everything is automatic. Whatever you say now is also automatic. It's all a result of causes and conditions. It appears to be more automatic than what you're doing now. Right? Actually, everything is automatic. Ajahn Brahm says there's no such thing as free will. You're here because you think you chose to be here? No, because causes and conditions are there that you're here. That brings us to the question, if we say that there's no self, then who is it that is responsible for his karma? If there's no self, never mind. You can do anything, there's no one to be responsible. Well, although ultimately there's no self, but because we are still deluded and we think that there is a self and we act, we will still reap the results of the actions, because all results come about because of a previous cause. And if the cause has been made, the result will be experienced. So even though you say there's no one, it's not anyone who's experiencing, it's the causes and conditions that are experiencing each other. It's very, very intricate. Now scientists have found out that it's really, really impossible to make any certain predictions about the future, because everything is connected and related to everything else in a very intricate way. There are so many variables involved. If you try to change one variable, that one variable will affect another variable, and that change will affect another variable, and that will make the final result completely different. So there's no such thing as a controlled experiment. Too many factors that are connected. So now that's why we have this quantum theory, which talks about possibilities and probabilities. That's all. And that could be something very humbling. Many of us tend to be intimidated by uncertainty. We want things to be certain, security, right? But we have to learn to be comfortable with uncertainty, because in reality, everything is uncertain. We can't really predict what's going to happen. It doesn't mean that you go around like a vagabond, not having any plans or ambitions. You can have plans and ambitions, you can have your expectations, but you should also know that they are subject to change, sometimes beyond your control. Yes.
Let's say like sometimes I'm aware of what is happening now. I'm getting angry now. And I know that it's not under my control, it's non-self. But you still can't switch your mind, you see.
Then you get angry and you realize that you're angry, but you cannot change your mind. Okay. Now you look at the Noble Eightfold Path. There's one factor that's called right effort. Yeah? And after that is right mindfulness. You might remember right mindfulness, you remember that you're angry. But you have also got to exert the effort to overcome the unwholesome anger and to replace it with something wholesome. If you cannot replace it with metta, then you can divert your attention, like I said. Don't allow the mind to dwell on what is making you angry, but divert the attention, give the mind another object. For example, physical sensations or whatever you're doing, for the time being, because eventually you have to come back to the anger. Eventually you have to understand the source of the anger, but not at the moment because you are not in the right frame of mind to understand. So you have to divert first.
Sometimes I'm able to switch the mind at a moment. Then after that I feel like, am I a crazy person or what? Because just now, at a moment ago, you just angry like you. Then a second moment later, you're like, change your mind, or you become very happy. It's like crazy people, you see. It's just like maybe half an hour ago, you're crazy like mad or what. Then half an hour later, you are like smiling.
We are by nature crazy. Unless you are enlightened. Actually, we are all living in an illusion. In reality, we are all more than 90% space. You know that? Talking about atoms and molecules, recently, a month or so ago, I read an article in the New Scientist. He said that within an atom, you have protons and neutrons orbiting a nucleus, right? And they found out that within the proton itself, there are 3 subatomic particles. And when they measure the total mass of the proton and the total mass of the subatomic particles, they find out that it is only less than 10% of the total mass of the proton, which means that 90% is just space. And then the proton itself, orbiting around the nucleus, a very small percentage of it is mass. So we are actually more than 90% space. And yet we look as solid as can be. Right? We also know that our cells are all dying every moment. And every 7 years, your whole body changes completely. Right? We also know that our thoughts arise and pass away constantly. And we are changing all the time. Our thinking is changing all the time. We know all these things intellectually. And yet, we are still attached. Yeah? You know that all these things arise and pass away. Our cells change and come and go without our control at all. We know that when we eat something, automatically the organs in our body, the glands in our body will produce the right amount of enzymes and hormones and regulate everything without our control at all. You know, it's all anatta, no self. And yet we are still attached. This is all intellectual knowledge. Intellectual knowledge is not enough. It will not give any impact on your mind to change your mindset or your attitude or your worldview. This must be experienced. You must see non-self through your own personal experience. How your thoughts arise. Look at the immediate cause, the trigger. As you do that more and more often, then you will see that there's not just one cause, there are many, many causes behind it. Only when you can understand through experience the causes and conditions behind your habitual reactions, then only can you be free of them. Otherwise, you are a slave of a habitual reaction. If you don't see the cause, you are just a slave. So it's so important to practice mindfulness and full awareness. You don't have to go to a retreat. You can do it. Just remember to do it. That's all. No excuse. No time lah, cannot lah. Yeah, actually, how much of your time is your mind on idle mode? You go to the toilet and you walk from here to there. Your mind is just thinking of rubbish. Comment on this, comment on that. See this, see that. Make use of all this. See how these thoughts arise and pass away. Look at them. They are not me, not mine, not myself. See how they arise and pass away due to cause and condition. You see something pop, the memory comes up. Memory triggers of another memory. Come back to the present moment. And something else happens. Another thought comes. See this again and again every day, as often as you can. Then it will help to loosen this grip on that non-existent ego of ours. that sense of I-ness. The Buddha, before he passed away, said these few words, and just remember. And this is the crux of it. That's all. Just have to remember. The principle is simple, but it's difficult to remember how to put it into practice. Let me repeat. The two most important principles to understand is that the mind must always have an object. Right? And the mind's object can be anything. Past, present, future, concepts, ideas, beliefs, assumptions, opinions. Could be anything. But the five senses can only take present objects. That means it's something in the present moment. You see, hear, smell, taste, feel with the body. It must be in the present moment. So, if you don't want your mind to get caught up in all those things which are not in the present moment, thoughts, worries, concerns and all that, and fears, bring it back to the present moment. Give it a break. After some time, when it has become more stable, then you can go back and look at things clearly. And you can do that anytime, and not necessarily you must sit down with the eyes closed. You concentrate on what you're doing at that moment, whatever you're doing. Be aware of the physical sensations, for example. Even if you're working on a computer at a table, you can be aware of your posture, you're sitting on the chair, your fingers touching the keyboard. There's one software that one of my students introduced to me. It's called Break Reminder. It's a freeware. You install in the computer, and this break reminder will blank out the screen once in maybe 10 minutes for about 15 seconds. So it forces you to take a break just for 15 seconds, which means that for that 15 seconds, you can stop thinking, stop whatever you're doing, and come back to the present moment. And that demands discipline. Because if you are very engrossed in an idea, you're going to type something, an idea, and suddenly come on, you feel very irritated, you see. So you must be able to watch your mind, have discipline, shut down whatever is happening, come back to the present moment, look at the thoughts, see how things are impermanent and not self. Then after about 15 seconds, then you will come back again. Very good practice. So if you spend a lot of time on the computer, this is something you can install. Then after you stop using the computer, the mind gets programmed. So every 15 minutes, every 10 minutes or so, you come back to the present moment. Because we are all products of conditioning. It's just conditioning your mind only. Now I'm programming your mind. So it's just conditions. That's all. There's no one there. Any more? Last question? You mean if some emotion arises in your mind, an unwholesome thought, you are aware of it, and then you also get emotionally involved in that thought. So when you try to change it, it's correct. First of all, you need to identify, you need to know, you need to have some theoretical knowledge to know what is wholesome and what is unwholesome. You need to distinguish. When you find that it is something unwholesome, and then it's possible, stop thinking that way. Either you substitute it with the wholesome thought, or if you cannot, then you drop it and come back to the present moment. Yeah, you can. But as I said, you should not just override it with another wholesome thought without understanding it. Maybe at that point of time when it arises, you do not feel emotionally stable enough to look at it objectively, then at that point you could substitute it with something more positive or bring your attention back to the present moment. Yeah? But that doesn't solve the problem. If that is an unresolved issue, it will crop up again and again and again. But you don't try to suppress it. At first, we try to substitute it with a good object. Then later on, when your mind is more stable and it comes up again, then you can investigate and look at it and see what are the causes and conditions for this state of mind and how to overcome it, how to abandon it. You can abandon it actually by going back to the roots, the root cause of it. Sometimes you're unhappy over the behavior of a certain person. He has let you down. You feel very disappointed. And that could be very heavy on you. Every now and then the thought comes again. Why did you do this to me? Why did you do this to me? And then later on, as you become more stable, you can understand why you have such a thought. Because you expect him not to do this to you and he did it to you. Can't you let go of it because it's already past? you will not be able to let go of it if you don't realize it. You still cling on to it. Why? Because it's like that. That's why.
Is that our attachment for that thought?
Exactly. It's attachment. Yeah. It's because of our inability to let go of certain assumptions, of certain expectations. We cling to them. That's why when things don't go accordingly, then we are unhappy, we suffer. So we have to look at how our thoughts arise and look at the root causes, and then when we understand, oh, I'm suffering now because of this root cause, then you can drop. If you don't see the root cause, you just see this unpleasant sensation or emotion arising in you, and then you don't like it and you like to try to push it away, you don't see the cause, you will always be a slave of your reaction. Okay? Yes, you won't be purified. Yes, you must see the cause. But as I said, if you are not yet emotionally stable at the time, you can't see. At that point of time, maybe you could push it aside first, and then change your attention, give the mind another object, and then when your mind is more stable, then you investigate into it.